Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I am again joined by Florian. This is episode 96 of the Casual Stream. And in line with our recent intersection of faith and science, we're now investigating the 2007 debate between Richard Dawkins and John Lennox on his book, The God Delusion. So I think like last week, we'll start with you, Florian. What were your thoughts on this debate?
Well, 1 second. Yeah. So, yeah, as I just said right before we started, that's one smug mofo. I mean, Richard Dawkins, and who knows if he gets paid externally or whether his own supply makes him high. Um, but like just one example, when he said, um, uh, so when they were talking about morality and if there's no God, and just Dawkins' answer was just like too bad. there's no creator, too bad, you know. And they're suffering in the world, right? They're suffering in the world, and who delivers us, right? If there's no God, too bad. Guess you're you're fruck out of luck. Yeah, I mean, where does this guy take the smug take the you know who put him on that high ground? Who put him on his high horse? You know, it's kind of infuriating listening to the guy, and he has been roasted for that, of course. Like there was this one South Park episode, "Go God Go," where Cartman wakes up in the future, and they have like this war between different atheist factions, and then they say something like they have like a painting of Richard Dawkins, and, and they said, as Richard Dawkins told us, it's not enough to not believe in God. You have to be a dick about it to everyone. And yeah, that's Dawkins. Now I remember even liberal friends back then in 2007, 2008, they thought he was a complete dick. Like he has taken it a little bit too far. So if we look at the debate itself, I think they had like three or six different six main hypotheses, like or points they were debating about. Like the first one was faith is blind, religion is belief without evidence. That was Dawkins' argument. The second was science supports atheism, not Christianity. The third one was design is dead. Otherwise, one must explain who designed the designer. And the fourth one was, I think, Christianity offers nothing to the world. Religion poisons everything, which, of course, uh, we can talk more about that. But this is just, I mean, it's a bad take. The Bible account of Jesus isn't true; it's a fairy tale. Also disputable. Although I've heard about arguments, people that there are Christians who reject the account of a historical Jesus. So that's an interesting point to also look at from that vantage angle. And then a world without religion would be a better place. This was, of course, Dawkins' point, and I would say a world with Dawkins is not the best place that can be there.
Well, so let's actually start from our present vantage point, right? So Richard Dawkins is now identified as a cultural Christian. Richard Dawkins, as of 2021, had his 1996 Humanist Award revoked because he got in trouble with the Rainbow Brigade. And furthermore,
Yeah,
the entire new atheist movement has more or less just blown apart.
yeah,
So it's kind of like glib complacency and smugness was completely unwarranted. This was 2007, and the movement goes in full civil war mode in 2011 with Elevator Gate. Only 4 years later, it wasn't even that long before it just completely falls apart. So, and this is and you mentioned, was Dawkins high on his own supply? I mean, given how many times Dawkins has flipped, you begin to wonder if he's just put up to this. Like, I mean, is he just paid to say these things? And like the real Dawkins is some like really nice guy that sips tea, somewhere in the countryside. And this is just, an acting gig. I don't know, but it's a question you have to consider because I mean, in fact, remember, it was Dawkins who started the Civil War when he responded to Rebecca Watson with Dear Muslimina. So like he literally started the atheist civil war that blew up the new atheist movement. So it's like, I don't even know what Dawkins is on about, but let's look at the actual performance. If we look at Lennox versus Dawkins, Lennox actually comes up with arguments. He comes up with points. Dawkins is just going with. He even says it. I think it's in his fifth questionnaire. He talks about a feeling in the air. Like I thought we're rational scientists here. What's this? Here we go. This is a quote from Dawkins' book. Yeah, it's quote the moderator is quoting Dawkins. No, this is Dawkins. Sorry, this is his response in the fifth thesis. He says, and I'm reading from a transcript. The consensus has moved on, and I find this a very interesting, fascinating fact, which suggests that there is a kind of something in the air about what is regarded as moral. And then skipping down a bit, there really does seem to be a powerful shifting zeitgeist effect, which doesn't tell you anything in itself, but which indicates that there's something in the air, some other force, something which we cannot understand with sufficient sociological, psychological sophistication, but whatever it is, it's not religion. Well, first of all, something in the air is not scientific at all. So I don't know what Dawkins is trying to do with this. And then second of all, how do you know it's not God or some other spiritual being if it's something that's just in the air? Well, it's funny he uses the term something in the air, right? Because in the Bible, Satan is called the prince and power of the air. I mean, maybe this thing in the air that he's like talking about is just Satan. But that's just another point entirely. He doesn't really have arguments. I mean, Dawkins is just giving you like his personal feelings, and it's like, I thought this is supposed to be reason. I thought this was supposed to be evidence. So I'll give you two examples that I think were really bad. The empirically false statement that a world without God would be better. Like, okay, Soviet Union, Communist China, North Korea, Cold War's only been over like 16 years. How could anybody make that claim? It's just so bizarre. And now, to his credit, Lennox does bring this up, and there's a time limit. I think in the interview, in the debate, they said they rented the space, so they had to get it done quickly within the time constraints. So we didn't get the back and forth that maybe we would have liked because of the nature of the acquisition of the property. But that's just demonstrably false. And I told you privately, Florian, let's have a test case. Tsar Nicholas II and Lenin. The machinery of state, the Russian state, is the same. And yet within 1 year, we have a total change in government. And Lenin just goes on this mass murdering spree. And the Tsar had been emperor for 2.5 decades. And the body count on his end is a lot lower than Lenin's. So again, same country, same people, same state. The only difference is the head of state, which is huge.
Yeah. I think in that if you talk to atheists and you look at their arguments, it always kind of boils down to I don't think I believe in God, and it's not useful for me, and I don't need it, so I can explain everything without God, and then everything else they just don't care about. And that's a little bit like the noblemen or nobility during the Russian Revolution. They went out there and they looked at the Bolsheviks and they thought, that's a nice piece of theater, maybe a little scary, but it's happening out there. It's not happening to us, right? And that was the fatal mistake, because eventually it did happen to them. And I think atheists are the same way a little bit. They don't really care if there's any atrocities happening or what their belief system is really giving the world. They just say, okay, I don't care about it. I just close my door and I'm not bothered by it. That's not a very solid epistemological framework. Let's put it like that. And in the end, they are going to get wrecked by extent of atheism as well, if it's state religion.
Well, the other thing that was just really painfully bad was the who designed the designer. So if the designer is more complex than the effect, or you can't properly account for the designer, then that's not an explanation. And then Lennox talks about the Chinese characters, the two scratches on the wall, and he's like, that is evidence of some higher design. Now, we may not know anything about the human that wrote that. It might be from an extinct tribe. Who knows, right? But we do know that a human wrote this. And
Yeah.
It's just unbelievably bad because in our daily lives, there are all sorts of causal effects that we assume without being fully able to explain because we have to, Otherwise, we couldn't get by in life. And so Dawkins just sort of punts, and I'm like, this is really just bad. It's shamefully bad. It's like a child, really. There's no arguments at all. It's not like, oh, okay, I have a set of propositions here, and I want you to deal with that, Lennox. There's no propositions at all. There's just feelings. One area where Lennox scored both rhetorically and I believe rationally is that little quip about faith. Dr. Lennox, no, not at all. I presume that you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that? Professor Dawkins, yes, plenty of laughter, audience laughter. Let's generalize it. Never mind about my wife. Let's say that in general, how do you know that somebody loves us? Okay, you can use a word for faith, but that's not the right use of the word, Dr. John Lennox. Oh, it is. Professor Richard Dawkins, you know why you know your wife loves you because all sorts of little signs, catches in the voice, little looks in the eye, and that's the evidence. That's perfectly good evidence. That's not faith. Dr. John Lennox, yes, it is. Professor Richard Dawkins, well, we're coming down to pure semantics. And so the thing is, though, it does matter because what does the word faith mean? Well, it comes from the Latin word fides, which means trust. So when you say you have faith in someone, that's not an epistemological claim. If I say that I have faith Florian will show up to the show tonight, that doesn't mean I have faith Florian exists. I know Florian exists. I have faith that Florian will keep his word. That's not an epistemic claim. That's a claim. The epistemic presence of Florian has already been established. Faith now is dealing with something else. Will Florian do what he says he's going to do? So when Dawkins says that we have faith in God, what does that mean? Well, it's not an epistemic claim. That means the Christian believes God will do what he says he's going to do. So it really is just a massive category mistake that Dawkins got rammed with.
Yeah. I think Dawkins was just not prepared. He thought like, this is some religious hick for whatever reason at Oxford, but still an idiot. I'm just going to brush over him. I think I read that Lennox read The God Delusion 12 times. 12 times.
Wow.
And Dawkins read his book one time the evening before the debate, and apparently Dawkins is not a genius that can just read these things quickly and then be up top about it. I mean, how could you, right? So yeah, Dawkins. I'm coming back to Dawkins. Is just a dick. He really is. But yeah, I think that explains why he was rhetorically schooled on some of these points. I also have to say. It's very, very convenient when atheists say, we can explain everything with science. Well, that's not true. There are plenty of examples, scientific examples that you cannot really explain with evolution. Like, take for example a very simple example. We are made out of proteins, right? And proteins are made out of a string of amino acids. And these amino acids, there are 20 different amino acids. They have a same basic form, which makes them able to align in like a long chain, but they have like parts of the molecule, like residues that stick out to the sides, and some of them are charged, others are not charged at all. Some amino acids don't have much of a residue, others have a very bulky residue, and that shapes how a protein is going to fold. And now all of these amino acids, they exist in two different forms, like glove and like two forms of a glove, right? You have the right part of the glove, left part. Those gloves look the same, but they are like mirror and mirror image. And amino acids are the same. They have like a amino acid, the so-called D form, dexter, Latin for right, D form, and then the L, levus, that's the left form. So, but in our amino acids, our proteins, every amino acid that makes out these proteins is in the L form. There's not a D form. So now, if you think about, say, the world existed and came into being by a primordial soup, and then somehow by coincidence the conditions were that they were creating some amino acids. That still doesn't explain why all around the world everything everywhere was creating proteins out of out of L amino acids and not the D form. That's something you cannot really explain. You can say, well, there was a slight bias towards the L form, and that has been basically locked in place later on. This initial bias has been just enhanced over time as more complex proteins formed, but that doesn't explain why that happened all around the globe. And it basically you cannot explain where life originally comes from. You can explain how it came to be in the first place. You can make up a model, but you cannot say why it came to be. That's just not possible. And there's several others of these examples that scientific examples that you cannot explain with evolution. So if Dawkins says everything will eventually be uncovered by science, and if he has a faith in science, that is not always well founded, right? And he kind of brushes over these things. I'm sure if you would ask him about that, he would just say, "Yeah, at some point we'll figure out why." But that is again just one trust. So whenever there's a gap in Dawkins' worldview, he just says, uh, "We'll some." Well, yeah, maybe there's a gap, but eventually we'll overcome the gap. And
Well,
and
go ahead.
that's and the reason why Dawkins says that is because he looks at the past and says we have overcome everything that we once explained with religion. We have overcome that always with science, but that still doesn't explain why he's so optimistic that specifically those gaps will also be overcome by science. It's just some form of cope and hope.
Well, yeah. So, like for example, at this time in the historical debate, there was also parallel in the study of like physics in the universe, the idea of dark matter and dark energy.
Yeah.
So dark matter and dark energy make up 97% of the universe. So there in no meaningful way can somebody say, "Oh, hey, we've almost figured out everything about the universe." Not 97% of it is unknown, which that's not what they want you to hear. But they do say that in the right places if you know where to look. But the other thing that's strange, and this ties back into something I've mentioned in our last stream about Hitchens. If we look, this is what Dawkins says in his introduction. He says, "I had a harmless Anglican upbringing. I could never claim that I had religion thrust down my throat in the way it might have been had I been brought up in a more militant faith. Anglicanism, as you know, is a very civilized version of Christianity." Okay, so Hitchens also said that his father did not shove religion down his throat. So if neither one of them had a very bad religious upbringing, where is this resentment coming from? This seems to be almost entirely like I would get it, right? If you grew up in the deep South with fundamentalist parents who didn't let you play on the weekend and didn't let you do the fun stuff all your friends were doing, and were watching you over like a helicopter parent over your shoulder, I might understand why you're upset at them, right? But like when you listen to Dawkins or Hitchens, they seem to have parents that didn't really give them a whole lot of trouble with regards to faith. So I don't understand where this is coming from, unless again it's a gimmick. Unless they're, as you and I and Keith discussed last weekend, Florian, the new atheist movement was astroturfed ersatz. In that case, you'll say whatever you're paid to say. So I'm not. There you go.
Well, it fits into the time, right? It fits into the timeline that people were, what happened. You have the USA as the one world power, and now people can basically do, at least for a period of 10 to 20 years, they can actually do whatever they want to do. It's kind of libertarian paradise in the 90s and aughts, right? So atheism fits in with that. People like that message to say, just do what you like, and don't worry about God. There's no God. We just nothing we can do about it. Just enjoy your life. And I'm not against enjoying your life. I was very much like that also in the 90s and aughts. It seems like an easy explanation, but it only seems so easy and so convenient because of geopolitical situation we were in. I think we also need to keep that in mind, and that would also explain why the message was so well received, right? So I mean, the message, if it was astroturfed, it was it was like an astroturf that went down very easily with most people.
Well, think about this too, Florian. Right in his statement, I forget, it might have been the third or fourth proposition. Dawkins even says, right, that other atheists, other biologists are mad at him for picking this fight with religion. And he says, that he diverges from NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, from Stephen Jay Gould. And it's like, yeah, it's like, who's putting you up to this? Like, all your colleagues are just like, leave it alone, Richard, leave it alone, And then now Christopher is not in the scientific department; he's a reporter, so different background, right? But it's like, wow, you know what I mean? It's just really weird, and this whole resentment angle, which is kind of funny, right? Because Mr. Atheist himself, Friedrich Nietzsche, would sort of consider this as slave morality resentment, right? Because they're motivated by opposing Christianity rather than some positive vision. And you mentioned the beginning of this discussion, Florian, where Dawkins says, "Oh well, boo-hoo if the world's bad or whatever. It's just what it is. We have to deal with it." But he then moralizes about the dangers of Christianity. Well, boo-hoo, Dawkins, Christianity and religion, Islam is just a part of the world we live in. You can't do anything about it. It's just so it's just like Mott and Bailey, where like he'll pivot like this, and it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe Richard, we just live in a universe where God made everything, and you're gonna have to answer to him one day. Boo-hoo. It's like,
Yeah.
you could just throw it right back at him, right? It's not an argument. Hashtag not an argument, right, Florian? And I do kind of wonder, what because I mean, don't get me wrong. There were debates between creationists and evolutionists going back to the 70s. There were debates between atheists and Christians in the 70s and 80s. But there was a difference. There was a difference, right? On the one hand, there was an attempt to be more, quote, scientific, more rational, right? They weren't quite as emotive. So, for example, next week, Florian and I are going to discuss the debate, the Huxley Memorial debate from 1986, where Dawkins and another Darwinian evolutionist debate two creationists in, I think, Cambridge. And we have the recording that we're going to listen to. That's a very different debate. I mean, sure, Dawkins is kind of snarky. Sure, Dawkins is kind of this or that. But he's at least trying to make an argument. Here, there's just no argument at all. And it's just his feelings. And, whenever he gets pushback from Lennox, it's just like, he doesn't have anything to say. It's like, it was just really weird watching this again,
Yeah. It's kind of like, and how you say it, anachronistic to see Richard Dawkins, because he has basically, I mean, he hasn't really been successful in making himself like a household name, right? He's kind of like went out with a whimper because like people made fun of him, and that was sort of like the end of it, right? And now he's a cultural Christian, but that is just now he's just a follower, right? Now he doesn't set the discussion. I think you had a similarly when you talk about the other debate. Can you remind me quick about the name?
Oh, you mean the one we're going to cover in the future?
Yeah, that has a specific name, right?
It was called the Huxley Memorial Debate.
Oh yeah. That's right. So the first debate in the Oxford Forum was the Huxley-Wilberforce debate, right? Was 1860 between Thomas Huxley and Samuel Wilberforce, and Huxley was a friend and contemporary of Dawkins, and Wilberforce was
I think you mean Darwin. I think you mean Huxley was a contemporary of Darwin.
Did I say Dawkins?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ! I'm sorry. No,
I think you meant
Darwin didn't deserve that. Yeah, I meant exactly. So basically, Huxley argued on Dawkins' behalf, so to say, and Wilberforce on the Anglican Church's side, and that was also like not as there was. I'm just starting to read about it, but that also didn't seem to be. Those people seem to be intellectually better than Dawkins. I mean, even Huxley, right?
So the other thing that's interesting here is there was the proposition 5, thesis 5, no one needs God to be moral. And then Dawkins, that's where I read the quote about in the air, which, okay, well, that's just vapid, whatever that means. And then Lennox says, well, as a Christian or as any theist, we're like, no, look, an atheist can be a good person, but the atheist cannot give an account of why he ought to be a good person. And then Lennox reads this really good quote from River Out of Eden: blind physical forces and genetic replication. Some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good. Nothing but pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is. And we dance to its music. Well, right. Okay. So I guess the 9/11 terrorists were dancing to the DNA's music. I guess Stalin's gulag was. I mean, if you're going to say this, you can't then say, oh, well, boo-hoo, this is a moral evil. You just said, Dawkins, in 1996, 11 years before this debate, that there is no, what does he say at rock bottom? There is no purpose, no evil, and no good. Okay, well then what's the problem?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and as you said in the beginning, if you compare the atrocities of Lenin of the communists, of the Stalinists, compared to the atrocities of the Tsar, that there's not a close comparison, right? Certainly, the atheists were worse there, and we have seen it again and again and again. Especially in communism, and I think that's the most striking. So even if you don't believe that there is a God or anything, then it provides you a stronger moral foundation, right? To have the church in your mind, or have Christianity in your mind, because if anything goes, you basically embolden people that like to be sadists, and that like to be mean to people, you have the worst slaughterers of human history. Those were all parts of atheism, even down to National Socialism. I mean, the people the CIA recruited from via Operation Paperclip, there were some unsavory characters, personalities among there, right? Without them, we probably wouldn't have MK Ultra and other, you might call them, atrocities by the CIA, right? And if you are led by faith, then there's much more likely that you will not do anything that you want to do, because you always have to worry about eternal damnation, right? So that's one thing that holds people back committing complete acts of savagery.
Yeah, and to the moral argument, so Dawkins says, actually, let me see if I can find on the transcript here.
Hope, meaning, and the moral anchor. I think that's how Lennox framed it. Basically, atheism lacks that, right?
Okay, right. So here, being moral, right? Dawkins says, I can think of only two reasons. Okay, let me start from the beginning. If you think about why you might need God in order to be moral, I can only think of two reasons how this might come about. You might say you need a book to tell you what's moral. Okay, and then skipping down, just more, blather. Where's the other one? Second, you had the. No, you might say that the forces mean we are all to a greater or lesser extent moral. Some of us more so than others. Whether we are moral has nothing to do with whether we read the Bible. Blah blah blah. I forget where he mentions the second one. He talks about basically either you want to avoid God's punishment or you want to curry favor with God, and then Dawkins seems to think that that's just bad. That just means, well, hey, you're not really a good person because you're doing this to receive some reward. But then what is Dawkins saying? It's evolutionary account of ethics. He says, I think that there was a time in our history when we lived in small kin groups, and we lived in small groups where good deeds could be expected to be reciprocated. Oh, so even for you do something good to get something good back. Like his entire argument against the Christian trying to curry favor with God falls apart because now he's saying we evolved ethics to curry favor within a kinship group. I mean, this is just cartoonishly bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. that's one thing. That's Yeah, I agree. As there's you won't find an immediate. I think that the mistake is to think that evolution always needs to have an immediate readout, right? So it's possible to have longer term moral actions, right? That just take place in a longer moral horizon. But still, it's also true what you said. That's basically you need to have you want to do good, right? You want to do good because you believe in something, and and that is not necessarily something that refutes the existence of Christianity. It doesn't. It's not something. It's not something that you couldn't. That you. It's something that you need to explain by the ultimate wish to do good. Because otherwise, why do a long-term endeavor where you engage in altruism and everything, right? So there needs to be a moral background to that.
Well, right, and in either case, the imaginary Christian case he argues for, and then his own evolutionary development theory, it's still the same reason. You want somebody else to reciprocate to you, so it's still the same motivation, uh, which it's just a different source, right? And so there's not really a huge difference here. The other thing is there's a sense in which a lot of airtime is wasted where Dawkins just makes these like snide remarks. So you could probably like shave off like, I don't know, 40% of the airtime and just say this is Dawkins, making wisecracks. You could just cut that out. It's very unprofessional, right? It's just not
Yeah,
it's not how a debate should be conducted. Now, yeah, and Lennox is trying to be professional. I think he succeeded. I think he does a very good job of being professional and delivering the Christian answer to these objections. And so, I mean, obviously, a lot of people like the New Atheists for their shock value, and Dawkins, does lean into that shock value, but again, he just makes these wild statements like there's just something in the air. Oh, okay. So, I mean, Florian, I guess in 1937, there was just something in the air in Germany. You okay with that, Dawkins? Are you okay with that thing in the air? I mean,
yeah.
you're right.
Well, Dawkins wants to be edgy, right? So as you said, he leans into that shock value. But I think Dawkins does makes one mistake after a while, and that's why even liberals say he was a dick or he is a dick. He becomes that guy, right? You never want to become that guy who goes to parties and always, regards everyone who is not of his opinion with snide remarks and thinks it's funny. It stops being funny after you do it. After you do it the first time, actually, it stops being funny. And he just that was all he was leaning in. If he's so sure about his side, why does he need to engage in these snide remarks? Like, yeah, here and there it's fine, but maybe use it as some pepper or salt, salt and pepper to flavor your arguments a little bit, but then it shouldn't become like a complete dead weight and waste of airtime. Like then you're doing it completely wrong, and I think that's also Dawkins' personality that destroyed him a little bit here. But yeah, I mean it's very glib, and if you look at how he discusses, um, I always interested in listening to people and looking at their face when they respond to an argument, because for a brief second you can actually see whether there's joy or anger flashing up in their face. People try to suppress it, but it's there, and if you train your eye, you can see it. And in many cases, if Dawkins has an argument, if Lennox brought an argument that Dawkins couldn't really reply to, he kind of like is like dumbfounded for a quick second, and then he kind of tries to brush over that, right? I mean, there's something in the air. What does that even mean? It's just a complete nonsense statement, but he brings that and then pretends that's some profound truth.
Yeah, so there's another really good part that I want to dig into here. So Dawkins says, and this is his response to the sixth thesis, Christian claims about Jesus are not true. But he's responding to an earlier point that Lennox made in the fifth thesis. And he says, Dawkins, you raised the question, how do we rebel? And seem to think that that was some kind of contradiction. There is no contradiction with rising above Darwinian dictates. We do it every time we use contraceptive. It's easy. Every time you use a contraceptive, you are defying the Darwinian imperative to reproduce. Okay, now this actually shows you how childish Dawkins really is, because there's an atheist philosopher from Australia named David Stove who wrote a book called Darwinian Fairy Tales, and he says, look, in the book, one of the chapters is about the theory of natural selection, that a species will continue to breed up until the carrying capacity of the environment, and then it will crash. And he says, well, we humans all the time, intentionally avoid reproduction. And he says, but if we're governed by the laws of biology, we can't break those laws because we're reducible to those laws. So there has to be something wrong in the theory. Now, this guy's an atheist. He's a philosopher, admittedly, but he's like, well, this is a big problem, because if we're governed by these biological laws and that they literally who we are, we can't rise above it, then we can't break it, right? Because that would be like asking a computer to break its code. You coded a computer, and if it doesn't do what you said, you assume there's an error in your code. But if you code it correctly, it's going to do what you coded it to, and it's not going to do anything different. So this David Stove fellow from Darwinian Fairy Tales, 1996, I think, says that that's a big problem, or 1995, that you can't do this. And another one, this really highlights this, is this has nothing to do with this guy's an atheist. What is Authority by Mikhail Bakunin, and he talks about the laws of nature, and he says that in here that humans cannot rebel against the laws of nature. Let's see. Yeah, he says this. Yes, we are absolutely the slaves of these laws, natural laws. But in such slavery, there is no humiliation, or rather, it is not slavery at all. For slavery supposes an external master, a legislator outside of him who commands. Well, these laws are not outside of us. They are inherent in us. They constitute our being, or whole being, physically, intellectually, and morally. We live, breathe, react, we think, we wish only through these laws. Without them, we are nothing. We are not. Whence then could we derive the power and the wish to rebel against them? That's rhetorical, but Bakunin says you can't. Bingo, right. Okay, so if these are the laws that govern us, and they are us, how can man rebel against them? That's actually a really serious question that Dawkins can't answer.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think also scientifically, we also have to be clear that, I mean, many of these ideas take root and take shape and start becoming more abundant by the context of the times, right? So basically, and we should never forget that Darwin was also like came from a very religious background, and I think he never said that his framework disproved the existence of God, something like that. No, he set out to say evolution is helps me or helps us to understand the glory of God. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but that's what he thought, and that was a similar stance that Lennox took in the debate in general, right? And I mean, Darwin took these observations from the Galapagos Islands and probably some other nature examples which I may have forgotten now. But it's mostly the finches with the different beak sizes and beak shapes and other things that he looked at and did a very good work there and found that these changes correlate to to where these birds were finding themselves in which environment. Like some birds needed more pointy beaks that helped them to crack some of the nuts that were only to be found on their island, not on the other islands where the birds with the more plump beaks lived, and all that. And I think nowadays there are some scientific experiments that have actually found a molecular explanation. They found some cause and effect in evolution. It's not just like a correlation, uh, but some things that Darwin didn't foresee was, for example, epigenetics, right? So basically, that we can modify our DNA based on our environment. So, for example, fathers that are obese themselves, they will they will uh, they will basically make their kids also give their kids also a tendency to be obese, and that's not explainable by their DNA. It's the environment uses changes of the DNA, and so this is something where there's not random variation in DNA that is then enabling natural selection. There's actually nature feeding back on the DNA, right? So these are things that are not necessarily compatible with Darwinism, and these are things Darwin couldn't foresee. So my point is that Darwin only took he had a great model to explain things in reality, but it's never like this one I fucking love science overarching truth as which people are treating it now.
So I haven't heard your opinion on him yet. So why don't you tell me about how you thought Lennox conducted himself? Did you think he made good points? What did you think about John Lennox?
Fantastic. I mean, the guy was measured, was funny, and was basically he had also like an easier way, right? So if you're in a debate and you're debating someone like Richard Dawkins, you must kind of like you must kind of think it's like, oh, that's awesome because you can clearly come across as the most sympathetic person here because all you need to do is just smile and refute Dawkins' arguments, and then you come up like much better, much more likable person in contrast, right? Um, I think I think also Lennox's idea of trying to consolidate science with or evolution with religion, or science with basically science with religion, like saying there's place for both, but religion wants us to have order. Belief in God needs to believe in order, similar to what Pastor Wilson said, which we talked about last debate or last show. I think that's a very admirable point and very good point actually, because Dawkins is just like kind of like flailing in the air with his belief in atheism, natural selection explains everything. We don't need religion, and Lennox grounds everything in religion. So in a way, that was a resounding win for Lennox, and he came across as a much more sympathetic person.
Right, Lennox was definitely one of the main Christian apologists that went on the circuit, and
I don't even like I know that's the word, a Christian apologist. What does a Christian have to apologize for? It's
well,
just,
okay, so
you know,
Florian, apologetics in the sense doesn't mean a formal apology; it means a legal defense.
yeah, I know. It just sounds, it just sounds as if they had to, as if someone is apologetic. That's used in a way like he tries to apologize. That always sounds a little bit like as if somebody would grovel. Of course, this is not the original root of the word, but yeah, I'm hesitant to call people like Lennox and Wilson and others apologetics. But I know, yeah, that's the official word, and it's not meant in any judgmental way. But I do have to say, I mean, yeah, we don't have to grovel or don't apologize for anything.
So, okay, so Florian, the Doug Wilson one that we did last week was from 2009. So we have these two debates that we've watched, which are over 16 years old. What is your overall thought on the Christians versus the atheists within this limited sampling?
Within the limited sampling of the debate back in 2007,
Well, this one and then the one we did last week that was
yeah,
2009 with Doug
yeah,
Wilson.
the last half of the odds. Um, well, spontaneously, I would say that's when atheists were the least bearable. But it's also, um, it's when the entire debate drifted into some, you know drifted into something unhealthy, right? It was dominated by people like Dawkins, which didn't do a good job in bringing the issue forward. And then this is coming together with the Obama presidency, and then you know you basically have to explain to like a lot of like atheists that have become very smug around that time. That's my impression That's my impression of that time. It's basically a switch from the classical atheists, that were happy in having a discussion, into the holier than thou atheists.
Well, maybe a conspiracy theory could be is that the new atheists were actually set up to make atheism look bad, right? So whoever was behind the scenes, greasing the wheels with cash, might have been doing this to make them look bad.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I don't want to pound on atheists here. And I also believe, especially in the 90s, I believe for a long time in atheism. But it's also, um, the church and religion was very intricately linked with the Christian religion was very intricately linked, especially in the United States, with the Republican Party, and the Republican parties were largely discredited. The Republicans were largely discredited in 2008. I don't know anyone who has been around at that time will remember how utterly burned the Republican brand was. It was completely destroyed by the Iraq War and George Bush, if that was deserved or not. But basically, everyone just was waiting, or at least the Democrats were waiting to just waiting go to the polls and get rid of Bush. And then the Islamic part of religion also didn't do themselves any favor with 9/11, right? So everything was stacked up against religion in general and against Christianity. And so lots of what atheists came up with, lots of many parts of atheism were actually fueled by the desire to go away from those from those from those atrocities. And um, and so so some people may have become atheists for a while because that just was an expression of their discontent with the political situation. But I think there's also a lot of people that came back to Christianity later on, and it seems like everyone is coming back sooner or later, including the physicists around the quantum mechanics in the first part of the 20th century.
Well, yeah, right. There is that saying that atheism is like a phase, like 20 years, then you come back, but to whatever faith you left. But I think I've covered most of the important points, I think, in this debate. Is there anything you want to add about Dawkins or Lennox?
Um, yeah, one thing I found really interesting was that the Bible is often treated as like kind of like a fairy tale collection, because you could get the impression that it's all just like a hearsay and somebody wrote it down, but who cares? It's all just like some vague notions. No, 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 no. And that was basically Dawkins' point also. It's a fairy tale, the Bible. But Lennox said that the documents of the New Testament, they are historically robust. They're actually written down, right, within the lifetime of eyewitnesses, right? So that's not just some fairy tale somebody recounted later on. Now, I'm not a specialist in the history of the Bible, so these books may have been rewritten at some point, but we should really be aware that at least at one point those books were eyewitness accounts. They were written down, right? So it's not something that it's not some vague recollection of old wives' tales. No, no, these things really happened at one point or another.
Yeah. So I think what I'll just say to sum up the debate was that John Lennox did a very good performance. He executed both Christian charity as well as the reasoning skills very well. Dawkins, I believe, did very poorly. But I think what we can say about the entire new atheist phase for Dawkins is it probably paid well. So, final thoughts, Florian.
Yeah, it paid well. The question is, yeah, and I mean, yeah, if you look back at what we talked about with Keith, that yeah, it may have been astroturf, the new atheism movement, and from that point may have paid well. But also Dawkins and others just they just appeared in the right niche at the right time to monetize the public angst and about religion, right? So many people bought his books just because they wanted to like as I mentioned before, there's a tension in people, right? People want to do something that they don't feel well about something. Something doesn't sit right with them. Let's say religion, right? And then somebody comes there and says, "Oh, it's all atheism. There's no God anyway. Here, buy my book." And they say, "Oh, thank God, I can buy this book, and now I feel better about myself, and that's it, right?" So many people that actually helped Dawkins and the other new atheists to become better weren't really atheists. Those are just some people wanting to have some absolution for themselves, right? Wanting to just have some, which is then in a way very similar to selling indulgences by the Catholic Church
Yeah.
at Luther's time.
Well, again, thank you, Florian. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.